Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, survivor of the zombie apocalypse. Welcome to my thoughts on The Walking Dead. With this video, I'll be covering the Season 9, Episode 4, The Obliged, which was easily the weakest episode of the season by far. We left off last week with Maggie and Daryl basically succumbing to their thirst for vengeance against the Saviors after they found out what Oceanside had been doing, which was hunting down the Saviors for past sins, I suppose. We don't actually get to see this plan executed. We see Maggie leaving Hilltop. Jesus tries to dissuade her, but ultimately isn't going to stop her. And she leaves to go kill Negan, presumably. But they've got a plan. She and Daryl at least have a plan. That's just one of the storylines. The episode consists of 3 of them. So there's that storyline. There's a storyline with Michonne and a little bit of Negan, though it's mostly about Michonne, kind of an inward-looking story about how she copes with the family and social life at Alexandria. And then we get just a slightly bit more of an update on Father Gabe as a captive of Anne's, which I think is, as I mentioned in previous recaps, I think that's going to be the overarching storyline for the season. But for now, it's not terribly exciting. So let's bump over and do my recap for The Obliged. Let's do Michonne's story first. So this, I think, was actually the best part of the episode. I just really liked the way this montage was executed, with her like continuing to get out of bed in the middle of the night and just take her sword. We get a lot of shots of like the sword, which the sword just obviously very easily symbolically represents her kind of her way of coping with her previous loss and trauma is just to go out and kill shit. Kind of like a action hero kind of a thing, where it's just, that's how you process drama and emotions, are you just gotta kill things. But she's dealing with Negan. Negan won't eat, and she's like the last person to deal with him. And she's trying to get him to eat, and he wants to just have a conversation with her. And they kind of have this interesting little interaction where he's still pretty manipulative, but she's smart, and she kind of calls him out on a lot of that. The only time that he gets to her is when he mentions her past kids, I believe, plural. She lost some kids previously in her life, and that's still a very, very sore spot for her, as I imagine would be for any parent, especially with Negan talking about it. But ultimately, she does stand her ground, and this goes on for a while throughout the episode, but she kind of is able to turn it around and realize that he is manipulating her, and he really only cares about his bat. He wants to get his bat Lucille back. That's the only thing he cares about in this world. If that could be considered a weakness of his, he has a very strange emotional attachment to Lucille, which he kind of projects as his wife, who had previously died. We learned that she had died of cancer, I guess, before all this started. Although he kind of goes with the, I've watched Fear the Walking Dead, and they went through this whole arc where there was this woman that said, like, you can't be weak. Like, you have to be strong in the zombie apocalypse. The notion of, like, you have to basically be, like, an alpha character. You have to be, strong of will in order to survive the zombie apocalypse. And this woman was a antagonist for the party and for Morgan specifically, because she thought, like, people were weak and she had to make them strong by putting them through this strife, or ultimately by, I guess, turning them into undead. And it's kind of a thing that's repeated here with Negan saying that, like, oh, well, my wife was weak, but you're strong because you fight. And really, it's just, it boils down to just him being that kind of alpha personality, where it's like, well, that's how you deal with stuff, is the strongest survive. It's, survival of the fittest. And that's, we like to think that humanity has kind of moved past that, but for some people, not quite so much. So ultimately, she is able to turn it around on him. And we see whenever she's outside doing her, fighting zombies at night, at one point a zombie gets the jump on her. She's like distracted by one that's hanging from a tree, and she drops her sword and picks up an object and kills that zombie, and that object turns out to be Lucille the Bat. So she tells Negan, like, it's out there in the world, and we see it from that scene that is the case. Like, they didn't hang that bat up as a trophy somewhere or anything, which you'd think maybe they might have done. But in a way that would kind of also deify, like, Negan and the Saviors and all that. So I think they actually made the right call here and just basically let it sit outside in the elements. And it's just kind of in a random spot outside. Probably not too far, because I don't think Michonne goes too far from Alexandria on her nightly constitutionals around the area to kill zombies. But he is greatly upset by the fact that she's left out there, and that does get to him. So instead of him getting to her, she gets to him, which I think is pretty effective. And overall, I did like that moment. And I just like having Michonne. I think she's a great character, and it's nice whenever the show actually like pays attention to her and lets her furthers her character development and gives her something to do, which has been, I feel like, less and less since they got to Alexandria. The other story that's not our big story is we get a little bit of an update on Father Gabe and Anne, which Gabe, as much as he fucked up last week and basically got himself like knocked unconscious and said, I'm going to go tell Rick on you, and yeah, I couldn't trust you and all that. He flips that around now, now that the chips are down, he's tied up, and which this is a reflection of that scene, I think it was last season, where she also had Negan tied up, and it was a similar situation where he was trying to, like, plead to her. Ultimately, that kind of works too, so Anna's easily manipulated, basically, as undoubtedly by the fact that she's also manipulated by this helicopter pilot who's trying to get her to bring him people, and presumably join up with this other colony, because now she sees Rick's group as not going to work. Which they rushed all this way too much. They rushed the fact that she was with the group, because she only joined them basically like between seasons. It was the end of the group. Like that was like the last thing Morgan did before leaving the show, was tell her like, hey, you should join this group. And at the beginning of the season, she's just there with the group. We don't know again how much time has passed or anything like that. We don't really see her involvement. And then all of a sudden, she jumps into this relationship with Father Gabe. They rushed through that way too much. So none of these like emotional stakes with these characters, I feel like, is working very well, because they just rushed through this stuff. If this had been a longer developed relationship over the course of a season, then this would have mattered a lot more. Had it turned out that she felt betrayed by the group, and in turn betrayed Father Gabe and all that. But I don't feel like this worked very well, because they just rushed through this. And this is episode 4, and we barely saw any of this work itself out. Ultimately, Gabe is able to convince Anne to not kill him via limbless weaponized zombie attack, and instead she just knocks him out. He wakes up and finds a note that is written by her that says, basically a cryptic form of like, all right, well, I just left without you then. And he gets like super upset by it. Like I actually had to rewind and watch this like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, wait, what did she say that you got so upset? Like, okay, yeah, she left. And he just acts the hell out of this, which I guess good for him, but again, I'm just not feeling the emotional stakes between these characters, because I feel like they just kind of rushed through this way too much. Our big scene is Rick and Daryl. Now, there are some events that need to set this up. First of all, and I don't quite have all the pictures available. For some reason, they didn't post quite as many pictures for this episode. But we see Maggie leave Hilltop. Jesus tells Rick, like, hey, Maggie's coming and hell's coming with her, kind of a thing. And Rick immediately picks up on that as like, oh shit, she's coming to kill Negan. He knows she killed Gregory, and she's got a huge grudge, and now that things have unraveled with Oceanside and the Saviors, now Maggie feels emboldened to just go ahead and do that. So Rick radios a lookout to like, hey, if you see Maggie, like stop her or something, and it turns out the lookout's in on it. I don't remember if that was Enon or just some random person. It might have been like somebody from Oceanside. I don't know. Again, there's so many characters now, it's hard to keep track. So that plan falls through, so Maggie's basically unimpeded. But Rick knows, so he's going to go to Alexandria and stop her himself. The problem is he doesn't know Daryl's in on it. And Daryl's like, oh, I'll give you a ride. And we as the audience are like, uh-oh, And he hops on the back of the bike. They go. Obviously, as soon as Daryl doesn't turn in to go to Alexandria, Rick's like, what's going on? And Daryl doesn't say anything. He's like, pull over. And I thought this would be a more tense situation, which I guess it does end up with a fight. But, like, Daryl does stop and just kind of throws his bike down like a petulant child. And then they kind of get into it very briefly about, Daryl's like, no, this needs to happen. And Rick's like, no, it doesn't. And then they get into a grappling match, as they do. This is not the first time these two have fought, by the way. And they end up falling down a plot hole, if you will, a literal giant hole of dirt in the ground. So literally they can just stop and have this kind of heart-to-heart conversation. And as stupid as this is, I did kind of enjoy this conversation. It's intense. These two have a very long, complex relationship together. They always call each other brother, and, where our bond is everything, but they also fight all the time, which is kind of like brothers, I guess. They have, I don't know, it's Daryl, and Daryl mentions things like, I would have died for Carl, like I'd die for you. But like this needs to happen, man. Like think of all the people that Negan killed and all that. Like it's I feel like it's a good conversation because they both have good points. You know, Rick wants to move on and use Negan as the catalyst for like, no, we can't just murder, we can't execute people. He'll be in prison for life. And Daryl's like, no, look, we have to kill this guy because he's done such bad things. Again, the problem is the show has never fucking created, and I think Michonne even mentions it, like we have laws and things like that. Well, we don't know that as the audience. Like, do you have laws? Because we've never. Is it just whatever Rick says? And at one point, you know, when Oceanside last week was talking about that, like, oh, we thought Rick's law was everything, but then you executed Gregory, so now, you know, we know that's okay. The problem is they've never sat down and written a goddamn constitution, so or you know whatever set of laws they want to make. They have no governing body other than just Rick and then like Michonne, like whoever is in charge is just like autocratic city states at this point. So all of these problems are spiraling out from the fact that they're trying to create a society without sitting down and coming up with rules, and it's really frustrating because like all the problems could be traced back to that. So they're in the pit. And again, I like this conversation, despite the stupidity of everything that's going on. They have a nice little scene here. Meanwhile, I don't think I have a slide for this. No, we're going to that. Okay. Meanwhile, Carol's group is approached by the Saviors. The bearded guy, I can't remember his name. He was the one that was a problem last week that wanted to literally just fight everybody because they were being attacked. Apparently what happened is Carol sent Pretty Boy Savior, I forgot his freaking name too, to go stop the other Saviors, I guess, or like try to get them to come back, basically. And I guess he maybe had a team with guns or something, because instead those Saviors come back with some guns, which is a big deal because through the whole thing, you know, after they welcomed the Saviors in, they obviously disarmed them, so they haven't had any guns. And that was a point of contention last week, is they had no weapons to defend themselves against Oceanside. This is before they knew what Oceanside was doing. Well, apparently now they approach Carol's group at the bridge with guns drawn, and they know it was Oceanside. Now, they're not there to kill Carol and her group. They're actually just there to, like, let us pass so we can go attack Oceanside. So it's a weird thing where it's like the Saviors know, like, well, we don't want to necessarily attack all of you because that's probably not going to end well, but we do need to go take care of the Oceanside and create this own little war between it. Well, obviously, Carol can't, you know, we can't let that happen. But Carol seemingly lets him pass. And then, of course, once he gets close, she does this badass, like, melee move. And again, like, he just underestimates her completely. Which I think that's the same guy that had her at knife point, and then she stabbed him, and, you know, all of that transpired last time. So obviously he's got a grudge, but still, like, he just didn't think, I don't know, it was stupid on that guy's part, which granted, I guess he's just a stupid character. The problem is, tensions boil over and shots start ringing out. So people start firing. I forget, it's other Saviors approaching, or somebody else approaches with, like, a gun drawn, and things happen where there is a fight that breaks out with gunfire. And Rick and Daryl hear this, and that brings in together these two herds. There was a scene earlier in the episode where Eugene tells them, like, there are two herds nearby that we need to try to, you know, watch and make sure they're not drawn to the group and try to lead them away and do what we can, which we saw a little bit of that earlier in the season with their little horns, and that kind of led to Aaron getting his arm chopped off eventually, was because one of those herds made it towards them. So that's still a concern at this point, is just these roving herds in the area, which again wasn't obviously an issue at all during the last two seasons, but now it suddenly is an issue. And the gunfire obviously is bringing these herds over. So Rick and Daryl hear this. They say, oh shit, we got to snap into action. They kind of boost each other up, and man, Daryl boosts Rick up, you can see in this picture, and then Daryl's able to get up literally on the bodies of the falling walkers, which is pretty funny. They make it to the top. They fight off a few walkers. Rick, of course, is all valiant mode of like, okay, I need to go, bravely, like, try to head off these herds. He gets a nearby horse, a white horse that he can ride in on, and says, all right, well, I'm going to try to lead these herds away, and you go back and, like, help them and see what the problem is. And they say, okay, so their moment is done in terms of that. And then Rick just leads. Somehow he ends up in the middle of the two giant herds of zombies. The horse rears up, and this happens within like half a second of him riding off. The horse rears up. He awkwardly falls off of it onto like some broken, building with a piece of rebar, and he just falls onto a piece of rebar, like right in the fucking abdomen or something. Like, it's nasty. And so he's stuck there physically. He's bleeding out, and I think the last shot we get is he's falling unconscious as a horde of zombies moves in. What? What? That's what you're going to do? Now, we know, weirdly enough, and maybe they did this on purpose because they knew that with this scene everybody would be rolling their eyes, because they did something like this with Glenn. If you recall, this would have been 3 years ago, I guess, because Glenn was killed 2 years ago. Glenn ends up in a weird situation where he's off. I forget what the deal was. It was him and that one guy that like kind of hated him, and their feeling was mutual. And they both get trapped by a horde of zombies. You think Glenn is killed because they're like, but it turns out that he has the other guy on top of him, and then he crawls under a dumpster. And you think for like a couple episodes that like Glenn is dead with this very unceremonious way that nobody knows about. And it was really poorly done to where everybody's like, there's no way, there's no way. And it turns out, no, there was no way. Like, they didn't kill him that way. He survived below a dumpster while this horde is surrounding him. It was really, really stupid. It was a cheap, tawdry thing to, like, tease everybody like that. It was awful. And I am getting all of those vibes from this. However, they did mention, Andrew Lincoln and the showrunners and everything did say that Rick Grimes will be leaving the show about partway through this season, and I'm not sure exactly where that falls. I thought that would mean like the mid-season finale, but it's possible, and again, I haven't really looked up this information, it's possible that will be sooner, like next episode or something. If that's the case, this is super fucking dumb. This is a dumb way for this character to die. And there have been very dumb ways for characters to die. I realize not everybody's going to be like a Glenn, brutally sacrificed by a main villain kind of a deal, even though that was also poorly done because they did it, between freaking seasons, which was awful. But having a character get killed because they literally just fell onto a piece of rebar in the middle of a zombie horde, all alone with nobody around them, like, oh man. I've got one more slide for it. There we go. I'm quite upset by this, and I'm not upset because, oh no, Rick. I'm upset because, like, show, why would you do this? I don't know, like, what is the solution? If you know you have to get rid of Rick, what is the solution here? Well, to me, the solution is to end the show, which they should have frankly done last season, because I feel like that would have been a good stopping point. They could have done a nice little epilogue, maybe a special or something. We're rebuilding Alexandria and the groups and all the city-states, and we'll go from there. That would have been a good ending right there. Instead of dragging it on and then doing this to Rick, basically while all of his plans are falling apart also. It feels like a really awful thing to do to this character's arc. I mean, he's trying to rebuild. He said to Michonne, like, let's make a baby. Things are going well, but now things aren't going well because the Saviors are riled up, and they're, he knows Oceanside. He learns that from Daryl, too. Daryl specifically tells him, like, oh, Oceanside is the one that's killing people, the Saviors, and this shit's, needs to happen. And Rick's like, oh, no, this is bad, and I'm trying to keep everybody together. So he's, like, on the crux of, like, his worldview is falling apart, for the millionth time, and now this happens. It just feels awful. I would be shocked if this is how Rick goes out, and I don't know how the show would recover from that. Like, it just feels really, really bad. If you would have told me that Daryl outlived Rick on this show years ago, holy crap. Like, I know people said, like, if Daryl dies, we riot. Those days have long passed. That is definitely not the case. I think Daryl has long been a thorn in the show's side for quite a while, in our characters and, frankly, to the audience in a lot of different ways. He's kind of a petulant child and just makes a lot of bad decisions, just really annoying. And he's kind of, ever since he finished his arc with, like, Zombie Merle and the Governor and basically made it to Alexandria, his character's been floundering. And, oh, man, it upset me quite a bit. I don't like, and not in a good way. Like, I was very annoyed by the way the show did this. So we'll see. If this is the end of Rick Grimes, I think it's really dumb. I think what's going to happen, I don't know. I think maybe Maggie might find him, or somebody will find, maybe this is the Whisperers. Maybe you'll see some Whisperers in here that end up, like, getting him off the rebar somehow and capturing him, and maybe he'll last a couple more seasons. Maybe he dies here and Maggie finds him, tries to fight him off, and he's like, no, you have to go. And maybe the last words he says convinces Maggie to give up her crusade and finally become the leader that she needs to be. That would be the only way I can see of salvaging this, honestly, would be if there's a final, the final sequence is Maggie coming by, he tells her all the things that she needs to know, But if he ends up getting killed, like, I don't know, that's gonna fuck Michonne up so bad. It's I don't know. The show has gone on too long. I think even fans can recognize that, and this is kind of an example of it. We'll see. We'll see. All right, so winners and losers for episode 4 of season 9. Winners, Michonne. I liked the sequences with Michonne throughout. I liked her montage of nightly zombie killings with her sword. I think she handled Negan very well. I mean, obviously, I like seeing Jeffrey Dean Morgan still on the show. I just liked basically everything about that. I liked how he tried to play her, and then she ultimately kind of reflected it back onto him, and that all worked very well. Losers, Rick. Sorry, Rick, you got played by Daryl and Maggie. Your world is falling apart, and now you're stuck in this horrifying situation that I don't see how you're going to get out of, and possibly you won't, but maybe ultimately you'll be the winner because you'll be off the show. Not to make too bad of a gag there. We'll see what the show can do and how it can salvage itself from this, but not great so far, and probably the weakest, I would say definitely the weakest episode of the season. Alright, that's it for my thoughts on episode 4 of The Walking Dead season 9. If you like my content, consider, where am I at, supporting me on Patreon via patreon.com/RogueWatson, and I will see you next time. More thoughts on The Walking Dead.